it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Kilometer 276. I work on the railroad as an assistant locomotive driver. I won't go into details of my job, except to say that my position is the lowest in the train operating environment. I'm always busy wiping oil off the diesel, knocking the ice off the running gear, and sipping tea in the cozy cabin. All in all, I'm happy with everything. What's a 20-year-old guy who got a job right after his internship to complain about? Except for the permanent smell of diesel from the clothes and the sleepless nights. Well, this is one of those nights that we'll talk about. Happened about 2 years ago, middle of January. I just started working independently, and I was assigned to a large station in the middle of a military town. The airfield and the station actually kept the village afloat, about 50 kilometers from my town. I lived in a rented apartment. I wasn't particularly happy with such a situation, but on the other hand, an independent life also has its advantages, although sometimes I felt homesick. And so, as my 5th shift was coming up, tonight was my night. Sitting at my laptop, I looked at the clock. It was 4:02. I exhaled and thought to myself, here we go. Didn't get any sleep before my shift again. I'll be in a state of boiled beets again. Alright, well, I'll get over it. I was distracted from watching my show by a phone call. It was Andrei Palyich, my driver. A cheerful bald man in his 60s, he knew his job and the locomotive like the back of his hand. I picked up the phone. Hello Palyich. Hello, Demon. Listen, I'm not coming in for my shift today. Had to go into town urgently, so I took the day off. When you get to the depot, go see the supervisor. You'll be paired with another driver for that shift. And then I'll come over and you'll be with me again. His voice was a little different than usual. He was breathing more rapidly as well, occasionally swallowing, and in general his voice sounded a little scared or something. Oh, I hear you. I'll come in. Everything okay in there? Well, jumped off shift unannounced. I had to leave in a hurry? I'm fine. My wife asked me to go see her brother. What the fuck you doing poking around in other people's business anyway? You ain't getting out of the engine room till the diesel shines. Okay. Don't hit me. Have a good trip. Well, Andrei Palyich hung up without answering anything. I looked at the phone with a disgruntled face and continued watching my show with a sniffle. As time passed, I looked at the weather forecast. -26 and super cooled fog. Just super. Got ready and went to work. I went to the supervisor, and there I was introduced to the machinist. Tall, stout guy, 26 years old. As it turned out, he just graduated and got a job there. It was nice to talk to. Had a knack for memes and games. That's it, I thought. After all the hustle and bustle with instructions and other foreplay, we headed for our car. He let me know that we were working today at a crumbling plant, an industrial facility that makes crushed rock for the railroad. Well, that's expected. Where to send an inexperienced machinist except to a single track with cars at the ends? Just go back and forth hauling cars, I thought. It's a good thing Palyich left today. Every time we work at the camp, something happens to him. Either he misses a vigilance check, or he exceeds the speed limit. He just has no luck here. Don't want to go back to the boss's carpet. I took the car, got on the road, and got to work. Everything was going just fine. The train was going. I was chatting with a colleague and smoking inside the cabin. Well, Palyich didn't allow that. So half of the shift passed. 1:17 a.m., the long-cherished bunkhouse to the service yard came through the loudspeaker of the radio. We'd had no lunch, well, not officially. They give us a couple of hours for locomotive inspection and maintenance. And how to use this time, well, everyone decides for himself. We left about midway. about 7 kilometers to the station, and the same amount to the train yard. It was comfortable to sleep. No spotlights and the rumble of locomotives and other machinery. Just a single track and dense woodland on both sides. Pulling on the brake, the driver sent me off to inspect the running gear, while he threw his feet up on the console and began to linger on his phone. Oh, what a lazy fuck. He could have helped, I thought, and got down from the locomotive. I had a flashlight, a hammer, and mittens with me. I walked around the car in a circle in the deep snow, and the undercarriage was fine, so I could go back. But the view bewitched me. A milky sea of fog, the rails going nowhere, and a lone locomotive, a majestic monster, a green, metallic hulk, whose light was drowning in this shroud literally 10 meters away. It was breathtaking. I lit a cigarette, and feeling that half of my thermos of tea was begging to go outside, I decided to go for a pee. Didn't take a piss by the car. The driver could look in the mirror, and in general it's not aesthetically pleasing. I walked down the embankment toward the plantings, lighting the way with the flashlight. I didn't want to brake in the dark, and as I did my business, I noticed a rusty sign with spots of white paint not far from the thicket of trees. Finished, I carefully moved toward it. After walking 10 to 15 meters, I removed the rusted and corroded plaque from the bottom branch of the tree. It still clearly read, TE3692. It was a license plate from some kind of locomotive. Well, Troika is a pretty old diesel locomotive. Such a find is a rarity for a connoisseur. Oh, holy shit. I'll pin it on the bumper of my car, put it in my room. Wow, what a catch. I was happily looking at the find as suddenly something crunched on the right. I turned sharply, shining the flashlight. The light was drowning in the fog, and 2 bright lights were clearly visible a couple of dozen yards away. Oh, the beast is wandering. There's a twinkle in their eyes. Hope it's not a wolf. And as I said these words, I saw the light slowly fade, and then disappear altogether. The animal didn't turn and walk away, though. Its eyes didn't look away, as if it had started walking backwards. Absolutely silently, the lights disappeared. I felt uncomfortable. Goosebumps ran from my top to my heels. I turned around a couple of times and lit the space. No one was there. Everything was quiet. Too quiet even. Not even the rumble of a diesel. Either I had gone that far away or the driver had shut it down. I must have already got a leak in the hood from not sleeping enough. Alright, we better get back. It's not the month of May after all. Holding the sign under my left arm, I hurriedly walked through the moderately deep snow toward the locomotive. It was safe, warm, and light. The beast wouldn't get in. I didn't want to think about what I'd seen. Branches crunched beneath my feet, but suddenly I heard a very different crunch. It sounded as if a large bone or someone's spine had broken. Damn, it sounded pretty nasty. The crunch sounded from somewhere behind me. Freezing in place, I stood motionless for about 15 seconds, digging a bunch of thoughts into my head and counting the frequent beats of my heart. My legs were getting exorbitantly cold, and little by little they went numb, either from the cold or from the terror. Then I slowly turned around. The lantern's light was fading again in the thick fog. 10 meters away from me, those lights were there again. But they were higher now, well, higher than they'd been the last time. About the height of my eyes. Now they were moving leisurely, outlining a lying figure of 8. There was that crunch again. Now I understood what its source was. The creature was turning its head and crunching its vertebrae. After 7 seconds of disgusting cervical gymnastics, my eyes stopped. The crackling of bones stopped too, but it was replaced by whispering. About 10 voices or so were speaking at once, male and female, far and near. Even children's voices could be heard. They all merged into a disorderly noise. It was impossible to make out what they were saying, as if they were getting into my head. Through the flood of my own thoughts and the whispering, I was still able to give my body the command. Run! I turned around sharply and accelerated. I ran as fast as the mud under my feet and the heavy winter overalls allowed me to. As I ran, I maneuvered between the trees and jumped over all kinds of holes and ravines. My legs were carrying me on autopilot, and I was carrying my junk and the cherished plaque. I was surprised I hadn't thrown it away. It wasn't my fault for all this crap, though, and I was carrying it with me. I ran without feeling tired, but I was starting to stress that the landing seemed longer than it had been before. It felt like I'd run for about 1 kilometer now, and the trees still wouldn't end. Another couple of minutes of walking, I ran out into deep snow, and the lane ended. The railway track embankment appeared, and I ran up it like on steps, though there was a good slope and gravel. Standing in the middle of the track, I stopped. A faint sense of calm followed. I got out. Okay. Stop. Where's the locomotive? I muttered grudgingly in a full voice. Looking around, I couldn't find my car. While pulling myself together, I assumed that I'd gone sideways in that landing, and the locomotive was somewhere further down the track. Because of the fog, I couldn't see it, obviously. Well, I had nothing to do, so I went in the direction of the train depot. The snow was crunching under my feet, and I was walking swiftly towards my only goal, to get to my iron fortress. On the way, I began to pay attention to my surroundings. The rails were rusty, the joints were wide. Stopping, I kicked the snow under me a couple of times, and saw that under my feet lay an old, rotten wooden sleeper. Twisting the toe of my work boots, I broke off a piece of frozen, rotten wood. It smelled characteristically of creosote, a substance used to treat wooden sleepers. Classic railroad smell. Well, this is the wrong track. Where am I? Looking around, I saw another sign. It was a kilometer post. On the concrete shaft was a white, in places rusty, angular sign. It had the numbers 276 on it, and on the other half, after the corner, 275. This was definitely not the way. The track to the gully depot is only 15 kilometers, and it's on concrete sleepers, and there are no posts. Looking at the sign and trying to make sense of this crap, I heard a sound I was already familiar with. It was the same crunching of cervical vertebrae. But now it was so close behind me that it felt like it was my own spine breaking. But it wasn't. At the same moment, a cold sweat broke out over me. The blood rushed to my temples, and I fumbled for the handle of the hammer in the pocket of my orange vest. As I grabbed the tool and squeezed it, ready to strike, I turned sharply. 1 meter away from me, it stood. Well, I couldn't call it human, but it looked remotely like a woman. A hunched pale body with twisted limbs in a tattered, dirty rag that looked like a dress. Twisted its head leisurely, arching its neck very violently. This was clearly not something a living person could do. Its face was ghastly, the torn skin exposed, a pierced skull, and a scalp of sparse, grey and long hair hanging over a couple of centimeters of skin. The mouth was torn to the cheek on one side, revealing brown, rotten, beastly fangs and a psychopathic smile on the other. The eyes were devoid of eyelids and eyebrows. They were completely white and emitted a greenish light. On thin hands, without 2 fingers, it held some kind of lump wrapped in an old newspaper. Out of it could be seen arms and legs. It was a baby. It was a baby. Dark, stinking blood dripped from the newspaper. What I saw made my muscles cramp up, and the sign from the locomotive fell out of my armpit and crashed onto the rubble with a clang. In the same second, the thing bent its neck down sharply, looking at the sign. When it saw it, it slowly lifted its head and grinned vilely at me, letting out a uterine wheeze. I knew I had to hit her, or she would eat me. I swung my arm back ready to put all my strength into the punch to crack her skull to mush, but someone had done it for me. A hand with a hammer appeared behind the creature and smacked it on the temple. The impact part went into my brain, making a squelching noise. But the bastard didn't give a shit. She twitched, turned back around, and ran off into the landing, bellowing out some pathetic noises. Well, if I had hit her, I would have been dead. Out of the fog, a man stepped toward me. It was an elderly man in an old-style railway uniform from about the 70s. On his head was a blue cap with a shiny emblem of the USSR Railway Ministry. He had a wide, stern face with green eyes and a gorgeous white moustache. Dumbfounded for a moment, I continued to stand in an attacking pose. The grandfather exhaled, brushed the hammer in the snow, staining it black and brown, and looked at me and said, "Put the gun down. Don't strain it. Why are you frozen?" His words sounded like an incantation. I immediately put my hand down and stood straight in front of him. "Father, where am I?" I said, swallowing my saliva. "Are you blind? You looked at the pulse for a minute and you didn't remember the number," he said kindly, but with a kind of reproach at the same time. "I know it's 276, but there's no such mile on this track, and it's the wrong track, and I don't know where the locomotive is. And what the fuck was that thing standing in front of me and it—" The grandpa interrupted me. "Why are you babbling like a machine gun? Do you believe your eyes? It says 276, so that's the way it is. Where else but on the tracks could your car be? On the highway? Follow the track and you'll find it. What do they teach you?" He grinned then. "What the hell was that thing standing there? You hit it with a hammer." "Well, the less you know, the better you sleep. Don't worry about it. Go on, the driver's waiting," he said, and then pointed behind me. "Well, all right. We'll see about that later. Thanks, Dad. Take care of yourself," I said. I was about to pick up the sign, but the old man grabbed it first. "Well, it's not okay to steal, though. That's mine. And say hi to Andre. Tell him it's from Egorich," he said, with a slight frown on his eyebrows. Well, I pretended to be like, "Okay, boss, whatever," and turned around and went in the right direction. After about 20 seconds, I heard a "Don't turn around" behind me. It already sounded like a kilometer away from me, even though I'd only walked about 100 meters. After walking about 2 kilometers, I noticed that the rails had become shiny from the toccata and were lying on the iron and concrete sleepers, and then I saw a huge square silhouette ahead. It was my diesel locomotive. The rumble of the diesel charged me with momentum, and I sprinted toward my target. I ran into the locomotive, closed all the exterior doors, climbed into the cab and sat down, and just fell asleep on my desk. The driver woke me up in the morning. We turned in our shift and then went home. In the smoking room, the old workers were talking about Palyich. They said it was hard for the man. He'd been through so much, and they were sending him to this place on the anniversary of the crash. When I'd finished, I caught up with one of the locksmiths and asked him everything I could. He told me that earlier, back in the 60s, there was no way out of the wrecking yard, nor was there a way into it. There was a line between the stations, and there was a machinist's wife. The poor woman went blind and crazy at 32. She took her infant child, went onto the track, and threw herself in front of the train. That train was driven by her husband. Since then, there's been a lot of shit going on at Kilometer 276. Traffic lights turn red. Radio communication gives out some noise, whispering and baby crying. And in the fog or rain, you can often see some kind of kikimora with glowing eyes. Trains would be there afterwards, and the track would collapse. Then the track was dismantled, and another one was laid to the communal base. Well, the men don't like that place. Does all of this have something to do with a certain Yegorich? I asked, lighting another cigarette. The locksmith looked as if I'd found out something I wasn't supposed to know, lit up and reluctantly told me that in 1977 this Yegorich was the machinist, and his assistant was Andrei Palyich. For some unknown reason, half of the crutches were torn out of the sleepers at that kilometer. The train was derailed and the driver perished. He sent his assistant to the diesel room and kept the train brake crane till the last moment and radioed back. Since then, Palyich constantly sees Yegorich on the side of the track at Kilometer 276. They were travelling in a Teshka of the 3rd series with the factory number 692. It turned out that Palyich didn't go to his wife's brother, but rather to the cemetery, to visit his fallen colleague, who'd given him a chance at life. Well, a week later I applied for a transfer to a station in my own city. It was smaller and paid less, but the main thing was I was less likely to meet that bastard again. I've been working that way ever since. Palyich retired and is living peacefully. As peaceful as possible after all this. Last week, I got a telegram saying they found inhumanly mutilated bodies of a locomotive crew and an abandoned locomotive. Well, I'll never go back there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.